Italian manager Maurizio Sarri is mostly known for his time spent as manager of Napoli in Serie A, and most recently Chelsea in the English Premier League. His organised, high-pressing and unique style of football has received many plaudits and has been named Sarriball or liquid football due to the great number of one-touch passes shown through the playstyle. So in this video, we're going to take a quick look at how Sarri has managed to implement Sarriball so far at Stamford Bridge, touching on minor differences with his Napoli side along the way. Then finally, we'll finish off with a quick implementation of the approach in Football Manager, as I know it's something a lot of my subscribers always ask for. Sarri's Chelsea lines up in a traditional 4-3-3, which becomes either a 4-5-1 or a 4-4-2 off the ball, due to the high pressing game employed. When pressing the opposition in their own half off the ball, one of the central midfielders or wide men, or second strikers depending on what you want to call them, often tends to push up alongside the striker, and in return Jorginho moves forward to fill that gap centrally, creating the Arrigo Sacchi inspired 4-4-2 pressing shape. In the scenario where the opposition are close to the Chelsea defending third, or due to the circumstances of the game or up against difficult opposition, they don't have enough players forwards to help Hazard with the press from the front, they then drop back into a narrow 4-5-1. The fullbacks sit narrow, and the wingers are the first to press the opposition out wide. Once the opposition attacker that isn't an overlapping fullback enters Chelsea fullback territory, the centre-back, along with the rest of the defence, tend to shuffle and move wide due to the movement of the rest of the back four, and then the Chelsea winger at times opts to shield and cover against the opposition overlapping fullback instead. This doesn't happen all the time, but is always an option when the centre-back gets wide to help their fullback relatively quickly, and has its advantages as the likes of Willian and Pedro are better positioned in the scenario where Chelsea do win the ball back to then counter-attack the opposition. When up against teams who have an emphasis on players making runs from deep forwards into the half spaces, such as a team like Manchester City, Kante and Kovacic are tasked with falling back and marking them. Willian and Pedro prioritising being in better counter-attacking positions also means that if the ball can be regained, an easy switch of play to the opposite flank is possible through potentially also utilising Jorginho's passing ability. During his time at Napoli, Sarri employed both an out-and-out striker in the system and then transitioned into using a false nine up front. This change obviously occurred after Argentinian striker Gonzalo Higuain was sold from Napoli to Juventus, and Belgian international Dries Mertens was then brought central. During the start of Sarri's era at Chelsea, he's used both approaches in the central position, starting with using either Alvaro Morata or Olivier Giroud as a traditional striker before recently transitioning Eden Hazard to move central to make the position as a false nine his own, with Willian and Pedro, of course, employed either side of him. In reality, however, it's important not to focus too much on terms such as forward or false nine. Sarri himself has referred to Hazard as playing as a free striker. Under Sarri, the single striker is expected to come deep a lot to overload the midfield, and as a result make room for other attackers to run into behind, as well as help with build-up play and get on the ball as much as possible. Why wouldn't you want a player of Hazard's calibre to, of course, do that? Rather, we should praise Sarri's coaching for his ability to get the best out of players such as Mertens and soon Hazard when going against the norm. Sarri's sides employ a very high defensive line in order to constrict the pitch size, allowing his teams to bring players closer together, which in return allows them to play their preferred brand of high-tempo, one-touch football better. The wing-backs are expected to get forward and provide the majority of the width when the narrow front three creates space for them. At Napoli, both Hysaj and Guillem were quite offensive, but Guillem down the left was slightly more aggressive than his opposite partner. This gave Napoli width on the overlap, when Insigne, who always preferred to cut inside on his right foot in field, would do exactly that. At Chelsea, this works out perfectly, with Marcos Alonso on the left and the slightly more conservative Azpilicueta on the right, who gets forward but picks his moments a little bit more wisely. When Azpilicueta does get forward, Kante is often on full alert and chooses whether or not to drop in and cover. Alonso gets forward a lot and is often even within the opposition box when the ball is out wide, with Willian or Pedro for example, and his support isn't needed in the wide area, and it's actually quite useful to stick him in the box because of his height and aerial threat, which is really something Chelsea don't quite have from other players, particularly playing someone like Eden Hazard up front. At the time of recording this, he has been extremely unfortunate, in fact, not to score in his past 2 Premier League fixture weeks, where I believe he hit the post twice. So, that tells you a lot about Marcos Alonso trying to get in advanced positions. The front 3 are also expected to play with freedom going forwards. Hazard in particular is given plenty of freedom due to his unique qualities. It isn't unusual to see him drop deep and pick the ball up against weaker opposition when Chelsea need an extra bit of magic, or just an extra man in general, to pull the strings. Or at times he might even pull out wide and temporarily interchange with another of the wide front players, which makes them all more difficult to mark and promotes fluid movement off the ball to allow Sarriball to occur. At times, Hazard tries to play on the shoulder of the last defender, focusing on getting into the half space between the centre-back and full-back to both help move his team up the pitch or even create 1v1 opportunities for himself. Hazard prefers to play with his face to goal, where he can run at players, than as a false 9, where a lot of the time he has his back to goal. Both Pedro and Willian can also either pull out wide if needed and play as traditional wingers, or stick to their instructed area sitting in the half spaces each side of the striker, allowing the width again to come from either the central midfielders, which we'll take a look at in a bit, or the overlapping wing backs. Sarri prefers a technical midfielder to sit the deepest of the 3, as opposed to a more traditional defensive powerhouse, which is more commonly seen in this type of shape, such as with Fernandinho sat in the hole at Manchester City, or Makelele back during Mourinho's Chelsea days. Jorginho was crucial to how Sarri's Napoli team played out from the back, and he is now with the Scholar at Chelsea as well. The best way to describe Jorginho's role would be as a regista, which is a deep-lying playmaker with more freedom and aggression that best suits tactical systems that emphasise playing possession football in the opposition half. So rather than maintain his role centrally, protecting the back 2 centre-backs when going forwards, he also has a licence to get forwards and join in on the attacks. We earlier discussed that Sarri prefers to keep Azpilicueta as the more conservative of the 2 fullbacks, and this is a reason why. Traditionally, you sometimes see the defensive midfielder or deep-line playmaker drop in between the 2 centre-backs and remain there. While Jorginho does this at times to pick up the ball when Chelsea trying to play out the back, as he's a regista, he eventually tries to move further forward and make late runs into the box to make room for his other teammates and also surprise the opposition and try and get goal-scoring opportunities himself. When this is the case, Azpilicueta is then able to become that 3rd centre-back and provide protection for the back 2. That way they can maintain themselves as a back 3. In scenarios where Azpilicueta goes forward too, Conte then might be the man who slots in. Understanding between players, but most importantly individual awareness and intelligence, is really important in this kind of system. Jorginho's greater technical and passing ability also means counter-attacks with direct passes are more likely to also be an option. It is for this same reason that David Luiz made his way back into the Chelsea side after timeout under Antonio Conte. Sarri likes having at least one ball-playing defender, and in this case David Luiz's technical ability for a centre-back is second to none. Whilst he isn't the best defender, that is something Sarri is actually willing to sacrifice for the sake of empowering the play out the back philosophy and the counter-attacking threat that comes with a centre-back who's able to play accurate, direct balls forwards. Italian football is usually thought of as traditionally being defensive-orientated counter-attacking football. However, while Sarri believes his team should possess a direct counter-attacking threat, there are points within the game where players should also look to employ a strategy with a more patient, purpose-orientated possession build-up approach. Controlled football, playing out the back with a flooded and fluid midfield, is harder for poor teams to defend against, along with the high pressing game when of course you have the players for it. Think of the likes of Manchester City and Liverpool, for example, and their brands of football. Chelsea adapt based on situational triggers during matches, and the players are trusted to do the decision making. They also employ an emphasis on low-drilled crosses in the final third, which not only feeds into the Sarriball philosophy of plenty of passing triangles and one-touch high-tempo passing, but also plays into their lack of height going forward, except obviously Giroud, who spends most of his time warming the bench. To assist with this, it isn't unusual to see the central midfielders try to get into the box as much as possible when the ball is in wide areas. Building attacks from the back, Kepa aims to feed the ball to either of the 2 centre-backs who have pulled wide or Jorginho, who is central. The central midfielders to either side of Jorginho then drop deep to create passing triangles, and the aim is to retain possession and play 1-2s to allow them to move further up the pitch. When the central midfielders drop deep, this is the trigger for the wing-backs to move forwards, in a bid to stretch the opposition and make the pitch bigger and give Chelsea more room to play in. The aim is to then work the ball wide, and when this is done and Chelsea can move forward from out wide, the central midfielders then move forwards, and Chelsea are then in the opposition's half and can start properly building attacks now that they've beat the opposition's initial press. During the building of attacks, this is when we start to see the striker drop deep to participate in build-up play, the creation of even more passing triangles by flooding the midfield, the interchanging runs off the ball and interchanging of positions between the front three. Problems with this approach start when playing against teams who specifically man-mark Jorginho, as we saw Spurs do when they beat Chelsea early on in the season, and teams that press Chelsea high themselves. This is why it's also important that Kepa is somewhat comfortable with his feet, because it means he's a get-out clause back pass option. There's been a lot of discussion regarding Kante's more advanced position this season, but as previously discussed, Sarri would prefer a more technical player closer to the defenders to assist the playing out the back philosophy. Chelsea's high pressing game also makes Kante's ball winning abilities an asset further up the pitch, as well as alongside the fact that despite being small, he is a great runner with the ball due to his strength and low centre of gravity, and that assists Sarri's side of counter-attacking. A great energetic box-to-box type player alongside a Kovacic or a Barkley or a Fabregas, whose purpose is to be the more technical playmaker-esque type player of the three in midfield. Kante has so much stamina and energy as well that it isn't like he doesn't track back and defend either. His energy is also perfect relative to the point that Sarri wants his centre midfielders getting on the end of crosses at all times. And due to his intelligence, he also provides plenty of runs off the ball when Chelsea are going forwards to try and create space for others. Is it Kante's ideal role? No, not at all, but at the end of the day, Sarri seems somewhat happy with what he's getting out of the Frenchman. Kante and Kovacic's movement at times during Chelsea's build-up is also really interesting. It isn't uncommon to see the likes of Kante in particular drift out wide to create a passing option with Azpilicueta and Jorginho. This allows Chelsea not only to overload one side of the pitch, but most importantly, because Kante is now in a position to receive the ball, he can play a 1-2 with Azpilicueta, and they can use it as a moment to speed up the tempo of the game and take out the opposition's midfield by playing through them. The movement of these central midfielders, the way they drift out wide, is really, really crucial to allowing Chelsea to move further up the pitch and to turn the tempo up. Whilst there are similarities between Sarri's Napoli side and his Chelsea side, he himself has stated that they are not identical and shouldn't be compared, because he has different types of players at his disposal at Chelsea. This is spot on because Willian and Pedro are very different players to Insigne, for example, who is also a striker and has that extra eye for goal, and really different qualities to what someone like a Willian or a Pedro offers. Neither Kovacic, Barkley, Fabregas or Kante bring to the midfield the equivalent of what Hamšík did. It's also worth bearing in mind that when people think of Sarri's Napoli, they tend to think of the playing style that was developed over a span of 3 seasons. Sarri's not even had his first January transfer window at Chelsea yet, and also missed out on pre-season preparation with some key players due to breaks post-World Cup. So Chelsea are still very much a work in progress. Chelsea will most likely still finish in the top 4 this season, however Sarri will need at least another 2 transfer windows realistically before it's fair to judge him, as some performances so far, despite a good start to the season, have been subpar, with losses against Spurs, Wolves and now Leicester. The jury is on. One of Sarri's biggest problems is that despite their decent unbeaten run at the start of the season, Chelsea have struggled to really convert their chances. As of right now recording this, they're second in the Premier League, with the lowest minutes per chance of 5.7 minutes, behind Guardiola's Manchester City of 5.6 and just in front of Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool of 6 minutes. However, Chelsea's shot conversion to goal percentage is a disappointing 11.7%. This is poor in comparison to Manchester City's 15.1% or even Arsenal's 17.1%. In fact, Brighton and Bournemouth both have better conversion percentages to Chelsea despite their 98 shots on target so far this season. They have hit the woodwork a whopping number of 9 times, the most in the Premier League so far, which suggests that they have been unlucky to an extent going forwards. From watching Chelsea, they sometimes lack a creative edge in the final third. Willian has been average all season, and Sarri refuses to drop him and give someone such as Loftus-Cheek or Barkley or Hudson-Odoi a go, even if in an awkward wide role for the likes of Loftus-Cheek or Barkley, which also proves the point of a lack of squad depth, and this could be down to the fact that a lot of the players that Sarri's inherited aren't quite his. Hamsik, in Sarri's first 2 seasons at Napoli, who played in the attacking playmaker central midfielder position, managed 17 goals and 13 assists in the 2016-17 season alone, along with 8 goals and 11 assists in the season before, whilst Kovacic so far has no goals and only a single assist in 16 matches played, which highlights a problem. In fact, I think the current statistic is that Kovacic hasn't scored in his last 73 appearances. Ross Barkley is playing less, but has managed 3 goals and 3 assists this season, yet it seems like Kovacic is the player that gets the nod over him. Even Ruben Loftus-Cheek has 3 goals, where most of them, I believe, have come off the bench. I'm not a Chelsea fan, but the word stubborn seems to be a recurring theme amongst Chelsea fans that I know when it comes to talking about Mourinho, Conte, and potentially now Sarri. And we both know how Mourinho and Conte ended. Even though I'm pretty sure if Sarri managed to win himself a few Premier League titles and do a bit of a Mourinho, Chelsea fans wouldn't mind. Sigurdsson for Everton has scored 7 so far this whole season. Anderson's 6 for West Ham, Son Heung-min and Shaqiri 5. The truth is, Hazard and Pedro, Chelsea's top scorers, need help with the goals. The Chelsea squad is good enough for a top 4 finish, but not good enough to topple the likes of Manchester City or Liverpool or even arguably Spurs on paper over the course of a season, no matter who the manager is in charge. Hazard needs support because when he's off form, it's difficult to see realistically where the goals are going to come from, except possibly Pedro. And he got injured yesterday against Watford. I anticipate Sarri will look to re-sign Higuain as a potential short-term punt in January and move Hazard out to the left to perhaps replace Willian, or given that Pedro is now injured, obviously you do the math yourselves. Timo Werner could be a decent marquee signing if Chelsea really want to get the chequebook out as a striker for years to come, because he brings both goal threat and creativity to the table, which really suits this type of system. If Chelsea are going to seriously keep a hold of Hazard over the summer, then they will need to convince him to stay based on their recruitment. Other names that have also appeared in the press as well as a potential January signing is Isco, who's recently fallen out of favour at Real Madrid, who'd be a great asset for obvious reasons, as well as the likes of Callum Wilson, who's having a very good season at Bournemouth. Other decent shouts to potentially fix the issues up front include Luka Jovic, who's on loan at Frankfurt, top goal scorer in the Bundesliga right now from Benfica, or even someone like a Mauro Icardi. Either way, to conclude, Sarri needs time before he can get Chelsea really playing Sarriball, the type of Sarriball that we all grew to love that was played in Naples. And you'll know what I mean watching Chelsea play this season versus watching Sarri's Napoli side. However, unfortunately, if there's one thing Chelsea managers don't get, it is in fact time. And that is exactly what Sarri needs if he is going to be able to fully implement his philosophy and bring the players in that he requires for his philosophy.